Good evening. It was a pleasure hearing each one of you describe who you are. We are our stories, and that's really what makes our relationship so critically and so important and so exciting to do. So basically what I'm going to do is share with you my story about my calling, which I didn't always recognize, nor did I ever always see and understand, and I'm still learning. It's a journey, as all life is, as we know it. But my watchword has become, I get to. And that's really important to me, because we don't have to do anything. We get to do it. And God's story, as I say, learning freedom in God's story as a Christian and a scientist. What does that mean? What does that sound to you? How do we walk in that, looking on the one hand the science we do, and as a Christian on the other? I grew up in the church. My foundation was there. I walked pretty much away from the church, or at least I thought I did. But there was a friend who was always there with me, whether I saw him or not always. And I want to tell you about that story. It's given me great pleasure and joy to reflect on all of this. And so as we look at this, let's see what learning freedom in God's story means. And the biggest question is, what does freedom mean to us? And if I can get this to work, well, maybe I got to get on the right side here. You want to go ahead and do it, Dan? Okay, go for it. Okay, what does freedom mean in God's story? What does it look like? If you had to ask yourself that and look at that, what are some of the things that come to mind? This is what came to my mind as I thought about freedom. It's the opportunity to be where there is freedom to live, where we have that chance to be there and to walk with Him. It's a place in God's story. There's a wonderful guy I love to read all the time, Eugene Peterson, and he made the comment, he said, everybody has a place in God's story. Nobody gets kicked out. And think about that, nobody. All right, who are these bodies we're talking about? And what do we see? It's where you get up every morning and ask a simple question. You have the freedom to do this. What's our game plan today? That is probably my most favorite time of the day, is when I can get up and have a conversation with God and talk to Him. And His two sidekicks, Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean it very lovingly and caringly, because they are such a special friend to me. Let me tell you what has got me on my bandwagon. Many of you know my history. Much of what's happened to me has been over the last 2.5 years, if you will. And it was triggered by the loss of my wife, Robin. And it put me on a different journey, a different way of seeing things, and asking myself a lot of questions about relationships that I'd never even thought about before, and looking at other people and other things. How do I see people? With that revelation, as I tell my story here and all the opportunities I've had to see people in other places. You mentioned India. I haven't been there. I would love to go, but I don't think I'm going right now. So I've been to China, but I'm not going back. At least not right now. But the whole idea of seeing and understanding people, and as I looked back over and did a reflection of what's going on. Dan, let's see the next slide, if we will. So here's some of the other things that I think it's important to remember. The bottom line is where there are no have-tos or ought-tos. You get to. You get to walk with Him. You get to spend time with Him. You get to have a conversation. And we get to do it with each other. And we're taught that we have a great message to share, and we need to share it with gentleness and respect. And I'm going to tell you about 2 jobs I've had where respect and benevolence and justice play a role. And that'll become evident in a little bit. But the one thing about freedom, it's not my freedom as an individual, it's important. Everybody has to have freedom. You have to be free to do what you want to do and to walk with the Father in the process. You need to be able to get to. And I get up every morning and I say, what am I get to do today? Some days I'm not very spry, obviously. Some of you are a little bit older than I am, not much. Most of you are a lot younger than I am, some of you anyway. But it doesn't matter what your age is, it's where your heart is and where you want to spend your time and get to do these things. Next, Dan. So, who is this I? This is me. I'm a broken human being. You have to learn to look at the second thing there. Be vulnerable, authentic, transparent, and trusting. You have to live that way. And I said there were no have-tos. There aren't, but you get to live that way because that is the only way you can relate to one another. You can invite people in for a conversation. I will tell you, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about Flourish and why it is so important to me. You saw the logos a while ago, integrating our faith, work, and everyday living. So we look at the whole spectrum of where we are and what we are doing and how do we relate to people and how we reach out to them to let them understand that what they do is important to everything we do. So as I talk about the reflections, I think you need to see life as a journey. It's a paved road most of the time. Sometimes it's kind of bumpy and dirt. There are many people that are teaching you and influencing you and teaching you one thing. And finally you get to the point to realize it's not I, but we. We need to walk together. We need to spend time together. We need to see who we are and appreciate what we can do. I'll be talking a little bit more about that as Flourish again. We have a group that works in faith and science and spends time getting together once a week and more often as necessary. And we get to sit there and have a conversation to make it happen. Next, Dan. So, in the next steps, I said, I'm going to give you a view of many people that God has used to teach this individual about we. This individual is a work-in-progress Christian. Also, I had a lot of training to be a scientist. Scientific development of my talents. So where did those talents come from? Our Father gave each one of us talents and gifts to share with each other and to do our job. And I'm going to give you a couple examples where I did not understand at the time how He laid the groundwork for me to be able to support my family through a lot of difficulties and be able to share the information they needed to walk in where they were. Okay. So, this is my revelation revealed to me. It's not something I discovered. It's something that was revealed to me. And it never ceases to amaze me as we walk in new developments in science and everything, how much God continues to reveal to us. We have new things to learn and we have new things to see. And it's exciting to learn and see and share. Okay, Dan. So, as in Flourish, you can see the logo there. Seeing the integration of my faith, work, and everyday living. My faith, trying to get to the place where I'm always willing to share it. Can I talk to anybody and everybody about what it means to be a Christian? What it means to love them as a human being? What it means to express the idea that they're created in God's image? And what that means to me? And can we do that? So, my work, seeing and finding ways to be a Christian in my work and what I do. How can I, in every job I come into, in every community I work in, be I on the site out there, be I in the church I belong to like Westside, be I sitting in a great group of friends, be it study groups or whatever the case may be in our church, we have a great group of people who get together and talk about the sermon or other things. And to be able to share authentically and vulnerably and the joy of what it means to be. Can I do that out on the site? as a Christian? Well, we we can't say anything about Jesus or God or anything else on the site, but you can live it. You can do it. And I'm going to show you how. I figured out a way to do it at pretty high level, actually. Okay, the final bottom line is my everyday living. I will say my family at times probably took a beating because I was a workaholic. I usually worked 60, 65 hours a week when I was on the site. 5/12s were not uncommon, and Saturday and Sunday too. A lot of times we worked at night for some of the studies because we were studying effects of light on the biological systems. So, this view of things has taken a meaning in many ways, and this is why Flourish Mid-Columbia is so exciting to me, because we can live it out. We have a chance to sit down and talk about it and see how we can walk with other people. We can walk with different churches. We can cross the barriers. And to me, that's exciting. I have some friends that just came in a little bit ago, and another one up front here who spent time in Africa. And we've had the joy and pleasure of hearing them talk about faith, culture, and worldview. And I felt like we lived in a box. We put things up on the shelf. Wednesday night, this is a Wednesday night box. Let's get it down. I'm going to church. This is a Sunday box. I get it down and go. But what about the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday during the day? Can we be Christians then? We can. We can do it. I'm totally convinced. And we can make it work. And all we have to be is authentic and vulnerable and willing to share and see people as respectfully and beautifully as they are. Okay, Dan. Okay. So, I'm going to tell you about this great plan I had. It wasn't my plan, and you know it. It wasn't a very funny joke, I don't think. But anyway, how it happened and what it has to be. Right now, who am I today? I'm a Christian in progress. I think I'll always be in training. Hopefully it's not training pants, but at any rate, I'm Presbyterian at the moment, go to Westside Church, elder. I'm a member of Flourish Mid-Columbia, as Dan pointed out, and it is a joy to be able to be there and to welcome people in. I'm a scientist, still learning to be amazed by the world we live in. And I'll tell you about that part. I'm a retired research scientist from PNL, Biological Sciences. Any of you familiar with the site? I spent a lot of time in the 331 building out next to the river, and my office was fantastic. It had a window on the river, and you got to see the sun come up every morning. It's quite a view. Most people thought I was crazy for being there, but it was a beautiful place to be. The other job I have, right now I'm a consultant for the Department of Energy. I chair a Human Subjects Board. And there, the whole design of that, protecting people participating in research as subjects or participants, is built on 3 principles: respect, benevolence, and justice. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So at the moment, those are sort of my calls. This is what I get to get up in the morning to get to do, and listen for his voice to hear what he has in mind for me. So next, Dan. So let's look at my education. High school, North Carolina. Graduated from high school in 1959. A fair student. I had a lot of playing time and a lot of girlfriends. And so I was a Southern boy who chased the girls, so it was a fun time to be. I went to a school called Pfeiffer University. It was college then. Had a BS in biology and chemistry, 59 through 63. In 63, I got out of college, and I said, what are you going to do now? I wasn't sure. And I found a few jobs around my hometown, which is Newton, North Carolina. about a population of 8,000 people. Not much a biology, chemistry major finding work in a town that's directed at textiles and furniture manufacturing. They're not looking for many people like that. So I had spent 4 years in college with a wonderful young lady who I met on a blind date in 1959. And we were planning to get married that summer and didn't. So we kept putting it off till I got gainfully employed. So I finally was able to do that. So I got a job in Waycross, Georgia, working for the Georgia Department of Public Health and their regional diagnostics lab, and learned a lot of microbiology and learned a lot of parasitology, which I could have done without. That was we had a lab in the basement of the building, and there was a fan in the window to pull the air out because the odor was kind of heavy in that room. And I swear that pine tree outside of that window was a lot greener than all the rest of them on the place. They were getting a lot of nitrogen, I'm sure. But anyway, so I was there from 63 through 65. And toward the end of 64, I said, there's got to be something better than this. So one thing led to another, and I applied to the University of Georgia. I got turned down. So I went back on my knees pleading and begging and said, what can I do to get in? Because I really think I can be a good student for you. So finally the head of the department says, okay. Tell you what I want you to do. I want you to come to school in the summertime and take 3 or 4 classes, one in English derivatives and a few other classes, philosophy, and a few things like that. So I did. Obviously I passed them, so I'm here today. But that was starting my journey back to become a better student than I'd ever been before and start learning again. So I was accepted in the master's program at the University of Georgia in 65. My major prof at that time was a fellow by the name of Frank Inman, and he was a driven guy. His specialty was immunology and immunochemistry, mainly immunochemistry, where we were studying the structure of proteins and the structure-function relationships. Okay, so I was there at the University of Georgia 65 through 70, and I got an NIH postdoctoral fellowship at City of Hope Medical Center, studying basic structure of antibodies, understanding how they bind, what the protein structure is. Anybody's interested, I can talk about amino acids till the cows come home. But I don't think that's what we're after. The second thing I was there, we developed an assay system for colon cancer. The marker was CEA, carcinoembryonic antigen. It's going to play a major role in my life later on. Little did I know. Okay, Dan. Okay, let's take a quick, see if I can find the button here. We start out at North Carolina here. We go to Georgia. South Georgia, Waycross is down here. Athens, Georgia, where I went to school, is up here. I came across the City of Hope here, and I went north to Richland and Penn&L in 1973, 73. With the idea, as I heard the gentleman say here, I was going to be there 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years at most. One thing led to another, and as I said, I spent 40 years and 3 months at Penn&L, and I still work for DOE part-time. So, next slide. So this gives you a little bit more about Penn&L here from 73 to 2013. My interest was the characterization effects of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation and chemicals on biological systems, specifically the immune system. How they interact, what they did. We did some studies for EPA looking at endocrine disruptors, things that alter the functionality of the endocrine system. And we worked on that wonderful study called bioelectromagnetics, electric and magnetic fields and how they interact with biological systems. And the interesting part about this, we did a study. There was a lot in the literature about all the effects people were seeing. So we had a group of people we worked with, engineers, electrical engineers, and biologists, all sorts of biologists, and we worked together as a team. And so the engineers, we spent time teaching them biology, and the engineers spent time with us teaching us engineering and electrical things. So many of the studies done on animal studies where they were seeing effects, we became the lab of no effects because we would find the mistakes in their design. For example, they put the water system on one ground, they put the animal on another ground, so every time he got a drink of water, he got shocked. Guess what happened? His body weight went down. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink. So, so what I'm trying to point out to you, as a scientist, you're taught to be a good observer and to really pay attention to everything you see. As a Christian, we're taught to be a good observer and to see each person and to see that respect we need to understand and feel and to see them and appreciate them for who they are. Be willing to walk with them and the joy you get from being able to do that. So being a scientist or being a Christian, it's all one and the same. You can do it. You can live it that way. My problem with, it took me almost 40 years to get here. That's another story. Okay, the other area I worked in was Global Initiative for Proliferation Prevention. That's a lot of high-sounding words of how do we interact and understand and prevent the proliferation of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. WMD, weapons of mass destruction. My area of expertise was in biological weapons. And we did this principally working with Customs and Border Guards was one way. We taught both domestic U.S. Customs and Border people at the Hammer facility and taught them all about the possibilities there. There's a wonderful guy that was here at one of that Greg's presentation by the name of Bill Cliff. I wish he'd here tonight. He was planning on coming, but his health is going downhill. And anyway, Bill was my mentor there and taught me and gave me a chance to work with these people and see other people from other parts of the world and for them to express to us what it meant to see and do things. A couple of times I had the opportunity to go overseas, and some of these people were from, is it the next page we got a map? Yes. Okay, let's take a minute and look at some possibilities. I may have to get over here to the map so I can see them. These old eyes aren't what they used to be. Any rate, obviously we're sitting up here and we truck in people from a lot of the Central Asian countries. I had to, here's Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. Guess where Turkmenistan sits? Right here next to Iran. This capital is Ashgabat. It's 18 miles from the border of Iran. And they suggested us not to go out of Ashgabat toward the west. You could get in trouble. So I took them at their word. But at any rate. Okay. So I had a chance to work with all these people. Some of them, at Hammer, we invited them in. And many of them I had a chance to go and visit them there. And it was amazing to me. One time, I think it was Tajikistan, we'd been there about a week, and I think it was getting on Thursday or Friday. And we had the people sitting there, and they're listening to us because, well, we got to put up with these guys. We're getting a free meal. We're not working at the border right now, and some of those border conditions were awful. They had to supply their own shoes, their clothes often. They had to have a garden for much of the food they ate. They didn't get paid a whole lot. And to come into town to spend the time with a meal supplied and they could get cigarettes and the whole bit. Because you can see them out there and you're talking and they're checking their watch. It's almost smoke break. And we're doing all of this teaching about weapons of mass destruction through an interpreter. And so I was sitting there looking at them one day and I said, And a thought came to me. And the thought was this. Now, you're going to realize it wasn't my thought. But I said, do you guys know why we're here? Do you have any idea what we're trying to do? We're telling you all this high-flying stuff about looking for materials made out of special materials for nuclear or chemical materials, special materials for that, or biological, different things that are indicating potential biological weapons. But do you really know why we're here? The interpreter looked at me and he says, what are you talking about? And I said, interpret. He says, okay, so he did. I said, we're here to say thank you. They kind of looked at me. Someone started sitting up, looking around. What do you mean, thank you? Well, you think about all the stuff that your forefathers brought to us, to the West. Astronomy, a lot of mathematics. Zero came from where? India. And many other things like that. And we just came to say thank you for helping us out, and we're coming back to try to help you out. And the posture changes in the chairs, and the relationship for the next couple of days was a whole different way of seeing things. We had a wonderful conversation we could have. But you had to find, obviously that wasn't my idea. But things happen, and if you're awake sometimes and you have the courage to do something, it happens. You just don't know how much courage it takes me to be up here. This is not my normal forte. But I'm so excited about it, and it's a great opportunity for me. And to share with you what can be done. Okay, Dan, back up one. Let's see if I've got everything done. Yep, that's got it. Let's go on to the next one, beyond the map. So, how is my faith integrated in my work? Right now, I have two occupations I'm going to talk about. One is a member of the board of Flourish Mid-Columbia. Now, that's an easy one to get involved in, to show my integration of my faith and work. And I'm also a member, and have been, of Human Subjects Research Boards, and I chair the Department of Energy one. And we'll talk about that too. So, next slide, Dan. Okay, let's look at Flourish Mid-Columbia. Dan hasn't seen this slide, so he's probably going to throw rocks at me. But anyway, Dan Woodruff's vision of Flourish Mid-Columbia. It has so resonated with me, and it's so built around his working with his major partners, the Trinity, and a few of us humans get to participate. So thank you. And it's built on the idea, and Dan talked about this, and he can talk a lot more, educating, equipping, and growing people who think theologically, live relationally, do good work, practice healthy patterns of rest and work. We need rest. And lovingly serve others for the flourish of our homes, workplace, and community. This is what we get to do. We can do it. We can have fun doing it and spend time with one another doing it. So next slide, Dan. So it's a faith-based organization. As I said, the motto is integrating faith, work, and everyday living. And we're partnered with anybody, for as churches, other groups, or whatever, for the betterment of our community and for our own salvation, if you will, to walk together. Community is essential in everyday living, and you need to think about how do you define community. I like the word village myself. I don't know, it's just friendlier to me. Community gets lost in some kind of esoteric definition or something. So we live in a village. And part of that awakening to much of this has been the recent presentations we've heard from the three people sitting in the audience tonight about faith, culture, and worldview, and what it does to us and blocks us from seeing and living with each other. Okay, Dan. So, we have a lot of tools and talents and gifts and relationships that makes this happen. And it all begins in the beginning. God created all. Every one of us, every stinking one of us. Nobody got left out in this creation. So, we have a beautiful story to talk about this creation, but the devil is in the details, and what usually is to divide us in every way, shape, or form. And we need to work, if we can, not letting that happen to us. We're all built with a purpose. You ever thought about that? We have a purpose, every one of us. Sometimes it's hard, and that purpose is our calling from God. Based on the gifts and talents He's given us, many of the gifts and talents we haven't discovered yet. Me being up here is one of the gifts and talents I've discovered in the last few years. And it started with me going overseas and talking to customs and border people and being able and have a confidence to do that. And I have to admit, I got more respect over there than I often did here. So, okay. And part of our job is being a steward of His creation. And part of that stewardship is the relationship we have with one another. And to share that and the respect we need for that creation in every way, shape, or form. Whether it's taking care of the water or taking care of this or that, whatever, we need to walk together and understand how we can do this. So that's the thing. And the relationship is with Him and His creation. And we're all, as I said, built in God's image. So think about that. I have some relatives in the South that's border on white supremacists. But many will argue that doesn't exist. Well, it does. And part of it, they don't even see it or realize it, unfortunately. They just don't have a clue. They just don't understand. And once in a while, I reach my level of a full boat and say, well, I think if you're reading Scripture, all of us were built in God's image. And it tends to get a little quiet then, as they're trying to figure out what they're going to say next. But that's okay. Maybe one day the light bulb will come on, that we're all equal. Next slide. So, one of the other elements within Flourish is our time we spend in Faith and Science Vocation Group, facilitating the conversation of faith and science. Part of that is about tonight. I'm talking about how I lived the career of a scientist and still being a Christian. This is my point of my whole talk, and it can be done. I work with a group of 10 plus people, and they let me be a part of the group. And they're all my mentors because I learned so much from them. They impart so much understanding and how we can walk together and reaching out to people and be willing to enjoy the life we live in His creation. We share the joy of God's creation, and the bottom line is the vision is with gentleness and respect and with a humble heart. So, that's where we try to be, and I think we are. They are. I'm working on it. Okay, next slide. Along with this, we're trying to figure out a way to be inclusive and not exclusive. Don't let the details cause us to exclude other people. Let the details and the diversity of other people be a way of inviting people into a conversation. It's not going to be easy, but we can do it. And what I say, the joy working on this calling is to see others having an opportunity to realize their get-tos. So each person has a contribution to make in everything we do, and they get to do this. We are learning what it means to be in His service. We're learning to me what a call is. Our job is a call that we had on the site out there. All the things we do, the moments we get up in the morning, we're being called to do something, whatever it may be. Next slide, Dan. So, the other job I said I have is a chair of a human subjects board. And how does this work? So if we look at a human subjects research board, the purpose is protecting the rights and welfare of subjects in human subjects research. My principal interest and job is for everything done by DOE in any of the studies they do comes through our board. I'm also a member of another board. It's called a classified board about studies that come through that board, and I'm aware of it as well. At one time, I was the chair of that board, but the politics got too bad from another reason, but not bad, but different. So the ethics finds its home in what we call the Belmont Report. It's ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human subjects in research. And that research can be as simple as your participation in a survey, that you may put in some of your personal information. And we have to be certain that that information is handled effectively, carefully, and protected, so it's not shared across the world. You know, it's not put on Twitter or whatever else it could be. Those kind of things. Next slide, Dan. So, here are the three principles. Respect for persons, beneficence, justice. Okay, respect. Where we've heard that word before. Being a Christian, we're asked to respect each other. Look at this board. What we have to do, we have to respect people. Persons with the autonomy of agents, in other words, the people involved. And we also have to be sure that we develop methodologies to protect people who have diminished autonomy for whatever reason. It may be a matter of understanding, or you can think of all the places it's been broken. And to talk about the Tuskegee syphilis studies, where great doctors thought it was a great idea. Well, I'm ethical, I'm doing everything, we're taking care of them. They just failed to follow through with treatment when they had a treatment in hand for syphilis. But they wanted control groups and treatment groups. There's been examples of kids used in centers of mental health, captured groups, prisoners. Prisoners have been involved in the early days in Westinghouse with the prisoners over in Walla Walla, radiation study. And the doctors thought they were doing the right thing. But here's the problem you have to look for. When your job depends upon you getting paid to get something, guess what? You're conflicted. So you cannot make an unbiased decision. So you need someone else to do it for you. That's where this board comes in. And a lot of people fuss at us and say, well, you try to make my life hard and everything else. No, we're trying to hold you between the ditches and keep you on the road. And we work hard at doing that. Okay, next slide. Well, justice, before we go there, justice has to do with equals ought to be treated equally. So how do you see equals? That becomes a really interesting question. So it's a question we argue about. That's the reason we have a board. It's made up of 12 or 15 people scattered throughout the United States with different expertises, from ethics to scientific expertise, you name it. Lawyers, we have a couple lawyers on it. Enjoy having a conversation with them too. All right, Dan, next slide. Okay, Human Subjects Board. Who are the actors in this process? There's the sponsoring institutes. We need to work with the people who support the studies or pay for the studies. And these often, in the case of DOE, we're working with the program managers about this. The principal investigators. These are the guys that put out the study and describe it and making sure that we can work with them. The board is the members, and I'm a member of the administrative team. I'm the chair, the vice chair, and the administrator. The three of us work together closely. Our job is to get all the information necessary to the board members so they can make an ethical decision about what needs to be done. So, and they're listed last, but they're first in our concern is the participants and subjects in the study. So, My objective has been to not only give respect, benevolence, and justice to the participants in the study, but approach all the other people involved in this process with the same idea. And it sure works a lot easier when you do that. It's a great fun, and I'm having a good time doing it. And I have said nothing about being a Christian. Everybody knows I am, it's obvious. However, I don't have to do it that way. You can live it out. You can do it. Next, Dan. So, how we do it? By practicing respect, benevolence, and justice for all. For all engaged in this endeavor, you get to see others in a total different light, and you get to see them get to do some pretty neat things as well. They get to live out who they are too, so even as in the Human Subjects Board. Next, Dan. So, I've talked about some of these people, and I don't know where my time is. Probably way over, but at any rate. I want to talk about some of the mentors, major mentors that have been in my life. And I'll start out with Dan. I'll go backwards here. With Dan, and he told you some of the things we spent time together at Westside, adult education, and we used to have some really knock-down, drag-out talks about compartmentalized living. How do we learn to integrate life and living it? And I'll never forget the time we were talking about what are we going to have for adult education, walking down the hall. And so we go down and see Carl Kopic. And Carl pulls a book off the shelf and he says, here's something I've been thinking about doing. It's called Surprised by Hope. Yeah. And that was another big plus in the world, as far as I was concerned, when Carl presented that at adult education classes. He's really a neat guy. He has a heart of gold. He loves people. He started a church in France, Pau, and they love him over there too. I'm surprised we're able to keep him here. So, but at any rate, his daughter's not too far from there. I think she's there, isn't she? Yeah. Okay, this gets us to Carl. I want to say one thing about Carl. I could talk all night about Dan and our relationship, but I want to say something about Carl. Early 2000s, Robin and the family, and Jim kind of showed up every once in a while, had been a member of Central Church. And it just wasn't working for me, so we were going church hopping and work. And we came to Westside, and the one thing it sold me on Westside reminded me of what had happened to me when I was at home visiting a church I grew up in North Carolina. They had the children's service. 5 minutes, maybe 10 at most, but usually 5 to 10 minutes. And the whole idea, I was sitting there in the pew thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could see the world like those kids do, with all that love, without all the baggage that we adults have hung on ourselves? Can you imagine the joy that would be? Now, how do I get there? I said, there's got to be a way to get there. So we went to Westside, and they had a children's service. I said, we belong here, Robin. So we eventually joining Westside. As I said, she had been at CUP, and I used to spend my Sunday mornings listening to St. Paul Sunday out at work. And that's how I did my worship for almost 40 years. Oh, I got there for Christmas, I got there for Easter and Mother's Day and a few other special days like that, but I was not a card-carrying Christian or practicing one at all. And I regret that. But everybody gets a chance. And he doesn't throw us out of the story. So if he'll keep me in, he'll keep all of us in. I'm thoroughly convinced of that. That's it. Okay, I talked a little bit about Bill Cliff. Bill Cliff was my mentor as far as out at Hammer and other things when we were working overseas, working on the WMD programs. Dick Weller was another friend of mine. He was a biologist at Penn and L. He's a veterinary oncologist, very instrumental for me and my family, as well as for me in opportunities to get to do other things and to grow my expertise and capability. So we were sitting in Moscow. We were running a program called Proliferation Prevention. So what we were trying to do was revisiting former Soviet Union, both in Russia as well as Kazakhstan and some of the other Stan countries, and talking about how can we partner you with your developed technologies. The Russians were doing a great deal of work with developing diagnostics and therapeutics based on so much of their work with those ugly little organisms they worked with all the time, the viruses and bacteria and anthrax and everything else. But they had some pretty neat techniques they developed to do this. They didn't have the equipment we have or had, but they had the manpower and the willingness of the people who would work that way. Okay, so we worked hard at trying to do that as far as the program is concerned, and I ended up being in the Soviet Union, Russia about 12 times, between Moscow and St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is a beautiful city. It's a gorgeous city. It's a friendly city. Moscow can be. It was at that time. I will have to say early on we could stay at the Metropole. The last time we went over, we didn't get a chance to. That was in 2010, I think it was. It was too expensive. It was outrageous. Beautiful, beautiful hotel. But the one thing I learned about those people when I had a chance to do that, there's not a nickel's worth of difference between us. What do they want? They want a job. They want to do well at the job and get paid. They want a roof over their head. They want food on the table. The other problem is some of them are closet Christians. Most of them aren't. Most of them are about like I was in some respects. Only I had the benefit of being in this country and not that country. But they were great people. They were hardworking, caring people. And some great friends I have are still alive. Some of them have died. I got to know a man named George Maslov. He was a MiG pilot. He had 2 speed records in the MiG and 1 altitude record. He was a friend of Yuri Gagarin, and he had pictures of him and shared with us. Rob and I and a friend of ours, Chuck and Nancy Watson, took a trip over there. Delta had done a big deal about round trip to Moscow from Seattle for $500. I mean, shucks, can't pass that up. So Chuck was always looking for neat things to do, so we ended up doing what we call homestay. So we stayed with George and got the thing, and he would take us around places to go to dinner. We went out to this wonderful Georgian restaurant, and there's a picture of Bill Clinton and some young lady. And I can't remember her name, but if I said it, you'd recognize her. Movie star or something. And the bill was about 6 of us, Robin and me and Chuck and Nancy and George. That's 5 of us. Was about $300 US. Wasn't quite expecting that. Fortunately, I had a few dollars on me. I never went overseas without money. That's one thing. But the point I'm trying to make is people are people. And they long for love and understanding and respect and a chance for us to see one another. And I had that opportunity. And I don't think it was by accident either. Okay, let's move on down the list. Marv Frazier. Oh, this is a great story. Marv interviewed me for the job out at PNNL. He was one of the employees there. I don't remember, you remember him, Ken? Anyway, he had a building out back of 331. He worked with viruses and things like that. And so I go out and talk to Marv. Marv looked at me and he says, well, what do you think of the place, or something to that effect? I said, well, it's interesting. He says, it's not cheap to work here. It's very expensive. And he says, I got another question I want to ask you. Do you know what the hell you're doing? And I says, well, I guess I'm going to find out, but I think I do. And so we had a conversation. Marv's been a dear friend of mine ever since. He was so upfront and honest about what it took to do research at PNNL. They took all the gloss off of it and all the need and all the things like that. A very dear friend and has been for years. He was diagnosed about 22 years ago with stomach cancer. So they went in and took his stomach out and built him a little pouch. So he has to eat a whole bunch of meals all day long. And he's still alive. And he's my Job. And he is a marvelous guy. And he loves his wife and family, and they've had wonderful times. But the point is this: there's all sorts of people around you that you can have these kind of relationships with. Marva's a great mentor. Bill Wiley. I got to talk a little bit about Bill. We all knew Bill Wiley. He was a crazy dude. His wife was even crazier than he was, Gus. They were wonderful people. They really were. And how I got to know Bill, really, when I hired on at Penn and L at 73, Bill was associate department manager for biology, I think, at the time. And he worked with Jim Park and Bill Bear. And so I worked with him upstairs in the lab at times. The techs we had up there were 3 ladies who came out of the labs out on the site. They were chemists out there where they walked around their buckets of plutonium all the time or whatever, doing chemistry of one sort or another. And they were quite older than the rest of us, and I was a young, wet-nosed kid. So they decided they were going to look after me, and they did. They took good care of me. But with Bill, once he moved up a little bit and became department manager, his office was there in 331, so when you came in the front door, he could see who was coming in. Bill was an early riser. He was always there before me. I don't know how he did it, but I usually came in pretty early as well. So every once in a while, I'd hear you, "Morris, is that you coming through the door in there?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "It's about time for coffee, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." So I go get a cup of coffee, and we go sit in there. And we would spend a lot of our time talking about what it was like to be black and white in the South. And that was quite a perspective for me, coming out of the South, something I had to learn. And that started me on the road of appreciating people and seeing people differently without the veneer I grew up with. It wasn't the way it needed to be. Okay. All right, the next is Robin Morris and family. All right, remember I was trained as an immunologist. Our son Eric, when he was 5 years old, was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. Huh. Wonder why I spent all that time learning immunology and all the information about it. So I quickly went to the books, could look up treatment regimes for the type of leukemia he had, and we ended up going to Children's. Sat down with 5 or 6 or 7 different doctors, and they laid it out. What it gave me was the ability to explain to my wife what was going on and what was happening and what needed to be done. And one of the things that happened with Eric going through these treatments, he had both chemo as well as radiation. And I'll tell you about the radiation in a little bit. Part of the way they followed the disease at that time was doing bone marrows and spinal taps, often weekly. So this is a children's orthopedic. The kids would go in and get that, and for their treat, they get toys. You know, a couple. If you got a bone marrow, you got a toy. If you got a spinal tap, you got a toy. So he's getting all these toys. So his older brother got close to Christmas. He says, "We're going to cancel Eric's Christmas." He's got all the toys. He doesn't need any more Christmas. Yeah. So I looked at Robin, and here's another example. I don't know where this idea came from either. So we contacted the doctor. So the next time we went up for Eric to get a bone marrow and a spinal tap, by this time it was down to about every couple of weeks to a month. I asked the doctors, could I take my oldest son in? So they gowned and garbed him up and let him see what a bone marrow and a spinal tap looked like. So he came out of that, and he kind of looked at us. He can have all the toys he wants. So you think that was my idea? Never happened. That was a friend of mine who was always there with me. Okay? Well, let's look at Robin, my wife. In 2003, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. Guess what kind? What was the marker for that colon cancer? CEA. Did I know something about that kind of cancer? Quite a bit. And it helped us and helped me to help her walk through and make decisions about the whole activity of the treatments and so forth. We initial treatment she got through, did some chemo afterward the surgery. She had a part of her colon removed, and she recovered from that. She hated seeing me come to the door after she had her surgery, because I was there 5 times a day, about every 3 or 4 hours, and we'd go for a walk down the hall because you need to get up and move. And so the doctors would show up and say, "Where's Robin?" "Oh, you know where she is. Her husband's got her down the hall." So that's what I do. It was a great time, and it was a fun time we had. And I look back on it, and someone asked me, "Well, didn't you feel burdened to do that?" Never crossed my mind. It's just what you did. You get to do it. I didn't understand get to then. It's been a more recent understanding on my part. But anyway, we walked through that. And she was pretty much cancer-free, appeared to be, for a number of years. In 2012, her cancer came back. And we went through all the possible chemotherapies, and finally she died in 2017. Anyway, that gave me some free time to think about who I was and trying to figure out my purpose in life and how do I live in this kind of situation. And a loss of someone I'd walked with since 1959. Quite a friend. She raised 5 men in the family, 4 sons and a husband. So a relationship is important. Okay, Charlie Todd was my advisor when I was at City of Hope working. Frank Inman was my thesis advisor at University of Georgia. The professors at Pfeiffer College, it was a small Methodist-supported college. They were more interested in teaching students than they were in doing research. They did some research and kind of kept up with some of it. But the science teachers and everything, you could walk in the science building anytime. And the Dr. Manley, who was head of the science department, you could walk in his office anytime and he'd stop whatever he's doing and sit down and, "What's going on?" They really loved and cared for their students. And it was, I had Old Testament, New Testament, Christian beliefs, and they had us all convinced they would know if we didn't show up for chapel on Thursday. So you rarely miss chapel. I laugh about that. When we originally went to that college, it was freshmen were required to double date, so you couldn't go anywhere. You could go off campus unless you were double dating. And that's how I met Robin. We met on a blind date. The guy had this hots for this young girl. And he wanted to go out, and he couldn't go. He knew I could get so-and-so's car because the guy would trust me, wouldn't trust him. So he says, "All right, Jim, I'll get you a date." And I said, "I don't think I want to get involved in this." So anyway, he talked me into it, and one thing led to another. And we went together for 4 years and got married in 73. So December the 7th. And the joke about that is I used to get rocks thrown at me. We had 2 disasters on the same day, if you think about it. So, but anyway. Okay. Sunday school teachers. This is where as I listen to Terry and Nancy and Wayne and think about my culture and worldview, where so much of that was sowed. And it was those leaders that sowed those values and taught me those values and spent the time with me. And I still to this day remember all their names. It is pretty amazing how important they were and how much time they spent. So anytime we can spend time with young people, we may not think it takes, but you're looking at one person, I think it did. I'm a different person because of this journey, if you will. My parents, hardworking, worked in the textile industry. My larger family, I could wax and wane about all the crazy things in that family. But anyway, next slide, Dan. So, how's my faith integrated in my everyday living? Seeing the opportunities to be there for others, relationships. More positive view of immediate family, giving room for them to get to, too. I'm trying to work with my kids. They're in their 40s, 50s almost, to help them. Some of them go to church, some of them don't, so they get to. And I think the biggest thing to me is the appreciation of seeing myself as a steward of God's creation. I do have a place, as all of us do, to be a steward. And that steward's not just forking out money. It's spending time and your energy and listening to his call on you, whatever you do. And the biggest thing is continue to see and hear what calls are made to me on a daily basis. Next slide, Dan. So here's a summary. I'm a work in progress, still learning freedom in God's story as a Christian and scientist. It is a journey, but it's with purpose and direction and a calling. We have to walk together. We need to do that. We have to do it as a conversation about any and all things. We have to be open for that because we get to. And it took God a long time to get me here, and that is the reality of it all. And thank you.